Good morning. It is the last week in March, and we're here to talk about pots, growing things pots. My name is Terry Gibson. I'm a master gardener for the University of Kentucky, Jefferson County Extension Office. If you're space challenged, such as I am, about 10 to 15 years ago, I started growing things in pots. I started with about 3 or 4, and now I've expanded to about 30. But today we'll be talking about the size of pots, potting mix, and what can be grown. But first, and most importantly, there's 3 what I consider keys to good gardening. Plan a manageable garden in advance and put it down on paper. Select an appropriate site. And you need at least about 6.5 hours for it to be in pots or in a regular garden with direct sunlight, not filtered sunlight. And then have some idea how you're going to be handling weeds. And in pots shouldn't be too much of a problem, or your disease problems. Everybody's going to have some sort of disease problem, be it a bacterial problem, a fungus problem, and also how you're going to handle insects. Best of all worlds doesn't happen in gardening. Every gardener is going to have these problems year after year, and it helps to have some idea in mind of how you'll handle that. My experience with pots is a result of about 10 to 12 years of experience doing this, a lot of trial and error, a lot of perseverance, and a lot of experimentation. Don't be afraid to experiment. That is necessary. But okay, let's talk about pots. They come in many sizes, but I grow most of what I grow in pots are type of vegetables. And I like to use something at least with a vertical depth of at least 15 inches, with a diameter of at least 18 inches. You can go smaller, but doing smaller, you're somewhat cramping the ability of whatever you're growing for the roots to expand. Now this year I'm experimenting with a cloth pot with a vertical depth of 9 inches growing cabbage. I'm not sure it's going to work, but remember, one of the keys to gardening in pots is experiment. We're going to see if this works. I've planted other cabbage in my regular garden, but we'll see if it's going to work. We first start with potting mix, or how do we fill up this pot? This pot would take about a foot and a half, cubic foot and a half of soil, which is a lot of soil. Now you can use fillers like this, or any type of plastic thing to fill up your pots. Put a lot in there. That way you don't have to use as much soil. But for me personally, I like to use something organic. Organic meaning once living. And I found over the years, and they're easy to come by, that I use wood chips, preferably aged wood chips, but any type of wood chips. The problem being with using these though, is they break down. Initially, they're robbing your plant of the nitrogen. They'll suck the nitrogen away. So one way I've experimented with getting around that is once I put the wood chips in, I sprinkle 10%, 10% NPK, 10% nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium into it. I hope it feeds those wood chips so the wood chips doesn't rob so much nitrogen from the plant. And then over time, as the wood chips or any other organic matter starts to rot and decay, it starts releasing nutrients to the plants. Ideally, in the best of all worlds, you want to replace the soil every year because there are certain pathogens that will build up into the soil. But realistically, it gets expensive. I've got about 30 pots out here. And the potting soil, anywhere from 2 cubic foot to 3 cubic foot of potting soil growing mix would cost probably about anywhere from $12 to $18 a bag. It would get expensive. So what I've done over a number of years now is along about February, when the sun starts coming out, I'll work my soil real good, and then I'll wet it down. And when the sun is out, even on a 40-degree weather, I'll put something like this, a plastic. And you can see how fancy it is. It's just plastic with rocks attached to it. It creates a lot of heat. Hopefully, it will sterilize that soil. And I've got soil out here, and it shouldn't be done this way, but I've got soil out here in pots that's probably been the same soil for at least 10 or 12 years. I've experimented this year with growing a cover crop in my plant, in my pots. And this year I used turnip tops, not the bulbs, but turnip tops. And then I just took scissors, it takes time, cut it down, worked it into the soil, and then I wet it down, and then put this on it. It's not really recommended at all, but it has worked for me. Again, it's just experimentation. This potting soil that we have, that I have, there's many good places to get. The big box stores have good growing mix. The hardware stores, what I've found, and I go to the local nurseries and say, hey, what do you guys use? And this is just a brand name. It's called Jolly Gardener. It's a custom growing mix. It's made up of a lot of good stuff. Canadian stagmum peat moss, processed pine bark. It's got some perlite in it, which is somewhat of a wetting agent. It'll aerate the soil. Some will have vermiculite in it, which does basically the same thing. It's just a mixture of good stuff. You can usually buy this from the local gardening centers, and this is what they use, and this is what I've been using for a number of years now. So let's talk about some of the things that you can grow in these pots. Well, you can grow anything you want. Will they all be successful? No. I have had tremendous amount of success at failure. You name it, and I have killed it over time. But again, go back to experimentation and perseverance. Grow anything you want. Keep records. The pots that I have over here, I started quite some time ago, and I've been moving them in and out of the garage. And that's a mixture of lettuces, some kale, and again, it's the latter part of March, and onion sets. The onion sets, I planted these onion sets here about 10 days ago, and you can see they're already coming up. I've experimented with potatoes in pots. You can grow green beans very easily in pots. Back here is a pot. You can put green beans around this, trellis right up these poles. You can use any type of pole you want. These are about 12-foot poles, maybe more. And one pot of green beans will feed a family of 4 very easily over a course of about 6 weeks or so. And once the green beans are gone, then you put something else in them. So what you grow in pots is you're limited by only your imagination on that. So what we've covered today now is the keys to gardening, good gardening, plan a manageable garden in advance, select an appropriate site, have some idea of how you're going to handle your insect problem, your bacterial or disease problem, and weeds. And again, in pots, you shouldn't have any problem with weeds at all. Again, all this comes about as a result of experience. And I've got It's taken me a long time on this, about 12, 15 years of experience on this, so I know what and what not to do sometimes. Perseverance, you just got to live through some of the mistakes and a lot of experimentation. So I would suggest you now, hopefully, the next session, we're going to be talking about tomatoes and peppers in pots. My horticulture focus is on tomatoes and peppers. And there are tomatoes now out there from seed companies are specifically bred to be grown in pots. Their growth habit is only about 3 to 4 foot. And I grow about 14 different dwarf varieties in pots, and then peppers, I have about 15 different peppers in pots, and they have done extremely well. I haven't had too much luck with just growing the regular indeterminate tomatoes because they grow so tall, and sometimes they just overwhelm the pot. So again, our next session will cover that. I would encourage everybody to involve yourself in making your own food happen. It's fun to watch this wonderful cycle that takes place between the soil. You have a seed. The seed produces a plant. That plant will produce a flower. That flower will produce a fruit, and then you've created and made your own food happen. We'll visit next time, and we will talk about peppers and tomatoes.